Hello, grounded Taurus. There are moments when the safest thing you can do is not hold on tighter, but pause long enough to ask what you are holding on to and whether it still belongs in the life you are becoming. Because there is a kind of loss that doesn't happen when something is taken away from you. It happens slowly, when you keep protecting something long after it has stopped protecting you. And around August 26 and 26, the deeper question may have less to do with what is coming toward you and more to do with what you are finally ready to see clearly. You may have learned early that security comes from knowing what to expect. Keep your promises, maintain what you have built, stay with what you know, and don't disturb the ground beneath your feet unless you absolutely have to. There is wisdom in that instinct, Taurus, because patience and consistency can create a life that others only imagine having. But sometimes the same instinct that helps you build something lasting can quietly convince you that changing it would mean admitting that all the effort was wasted. Think of a house that has stood for many years. Every time a small crack appears, you repair it. When a door begins to stick, you adjust the frame. When the paint fades, you cover it with another layer. And when something feels uncomfortable inside, you tell yourself that every home has its difficult corners. From the outside, the house still looks solid, but eventually you may notice that you have spent so much energy preserving the structure that you stopped asking whether the life inside it still feels like your own. That is where Taurus can encounter a very private kind of tension. You may not stay because you are weak, and you may not stay because you cannot see what is happening. Sometimes you stay because you remember everything it took to get there. You remember the years, the effort, the promises, the sacrifices, the moments when walking away would have felt like throwing something valuable into the fire. So you keep telling yourself that patience will eventually make the old structure feel right again. But how long can familiarity continue to be called safety when your inner world has already begun asking for something different? And how many times can you convince yourself that you are simply being loyal when, somewhere underneath that loyalty, there is also fear of beginning again? These are uncomfortable questions because Taurus rarely gives up on something lightly. When you commit, you tend to put real weight behind that commitment, and that is precisely why recognizing when something has changed can require more courage than simply holding on. There's another kind of accumulation happening beneath the surface too. Every time you silence the part of yourself that says, "This no longer feels right," every time you postpone a decision because the familiar option seems easier, every time you choose certainty simply because uncertainty asks more of you, something gets stored inside. Not necessarily resentment, and not necessarily regret, but information. Your body remembers what your mind keeps explaining away, and eventually those quiet signals begin to form a pattern you can no longer ignore. Imagine roots beneath the soil. From above, the ground appears still, almost untouched, while underneath, an entire network is shifting, searching, separating, and reaching toward whatever can sustain life. That is how change can happen for you, Taurus. It does not always arrive with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes it begins as a subtle discomfort, a growing awareness that the life you carefully maintained has become too small for the person you have quietly grown into. And perhaps that is why something you once called stability can begin to feel strangely heavy. The job you stayed with because it was dependable, the relationship you protected because of everything you had already shared, the routine you kept because it gave your days a familiar shape, the role you continued carrying because people had come to rely on you. None of these things are automatically wrong, but the question is whether you are still choosing them, or whether your history with them has started making the choice for you. There is a difference between commitment and attachment, Taurus, and sometimes the difference is almost impossible to see from inside the situation. Commitment says, "This still has meaning, so I am willing to nurture it." Attachment says, "I have already given so much that I cannot imagine letting it change." One is rooted in present value. The other can be rooted in the fear that releasing the old version of your life would somehow erase everything you invested in it. That is why this period asks for honesty rather than urgency. You do not have to tear everything down simply because something inside you has shifted. You do not have to abandon what is good just to prove that you are capable of change. What matters is learning to examine the foundation beneath your choices and asking whether it still supports the person standing on top of it. Because sometimes the most mature form of stability is knowing when something needs to be rebuilt rather than endlessly repaired. If this is touching something you've been carrying quietly, ask yourself something simple but honest. What have you continued holding because it still has real value? And what have you continued holding because it is familiar? There is a difference between protecting something precious and protecting yourself from the discomfort of change. If you have ever given up a possibility simply because starting over felt harder than staying where you were, you are not alone in that experience, and you may recognize more of yourself in this question than you expected. The deeper realization comes when you understand that letting go of an old structure does not mean you have lost everything it gave you. The patience remains, the lessons remain, the strength you developed while building it remains. Even the parts that disappointed you can become part of your understanding of what you will and will not accept going forward. Which means the value of your past does not depend on keeping the past exactly as it was. Think again of the roots beneath the ground. They do not honor the soil by refusing to grow beyond the same patch of earth forever. They respond to what is available. They reach where nourishment can be found, and they continue building beneath the surface long before anyone sees the evidence above it. In the same way, you can respect what gave you stability without making a lifelong promise to remain unchanged because of it. And maybe this is where the idea of something returning takes on a different meaning for you. What comes back may not be the exact opportunity, relationship, recognition, or version of life you once wanted. It may be your ability to recognize your own worth without needing the old circumstances to confirm it. It may be a better standard, a healthier form of security, a new possibility that you could not see while your hands were completely occupied with protecting what you already had. Because when you finally stop measuring your worth by how much you can preserve, endure, or carry, you begin to notice another kind of abundance. You start to understand that stability is not simply remaining in one place. Sometimes stability is trusting yourself enough to move when the ground has changed, knowing that the strength you built does not disappear just because you choose to build differently now. And as that realization settles deeper, the question becomes less about what you are losing and more about what your life has been quietly preparing you to value again. And for a moment, you may realize that you don't know how to answer. Not because you have stopped wanting things, and not because your desires disappeared, but because so much of your attention has gone into protecting what you already built that your original wants have become difficult to hear beneath all that responsibility. You've spent so much time making sure the ground stays steady that you may have forgotten to ask whether the life standing on that ground still feels like yours. Yet something being buried does not mean it has disappeared. Somewhere beneath the surface, the part of you that knows what matters is still there, waiting for enough quiet to make itself known again. This is where the story begins to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Everything you have invested, in everything you have patiently maintained, every choice you made, because it seemed to offer stability, has left something behind inside you. And those experiences have shaped you in ways you may only now be able to recognize. They did not simply vanish because circumstances changed or because you remained with something longer than you intended. Think of a house whose foundation has been settling quietly beneath the ground from the outside. The walls may still look strong. The familiar rooms may still feel comforting, and nothing may appear dramatically wrong. But underneath, small movements have been taking place for a long time. Eventually, those changes become impossible to ignore. Not because everything suddenly collapses, but because you begin noticing the small details you once dismissed as insignificant. A door that no longer closes the same way, a floor that feels slightly uneven beneath your feet, a room that once brought comfort but now feels strangely cramped, or a corner of your life that you keep repairing without ever stopping to ask why it needs so much repair in the first place. This is how a deeper truth can reach you, Taurus. Sometimes the structure is not failing because you did something wrong. Sometimes it is simply showing you that the way it was built no longer matches the person living inside it. And what has been accumulating inside you is not only disappointment or fatigue, It is also everything you have learned through patience, endurance, loyalty, and the quiet effort of continuing when nobody else could see how much energy it required. The years you spent building stability taught you something about what commitment can create, but they also taught you what constant maintenance can cost. The times you remained when leaving might have been easier taught you something about loyalty, while the opportunities you postponed because you were protecting what already existed became part of your understanding of what security really means and what it should never require from you. That is why the return may not look the way you once imagined. What comes back to you may not be the exact person, position, opportunity, or circumstance you thought you had lost, because sometimes the deeper return happens within you before it becomes visible around you. It may arrive as a clearer sense of what you deserve, a stronger boundary, a more honest choice, or the courage to stop investing in something simply because you have already invested so much. Sometimes what returns is not the past itself, but the value you once placed beneath everything else, finally rising back into a place where you can see it clearly. And there is something important about that realization, especially for you, Taurus. You do not have to destroy everything you built in order to prove that you have changed. And you do not have to treat every familiar thing as an obstacle simply because a new version of you is beginning to emerge. Your growth does not require you to become reckless with the life you have carefully created. The deeper shift is learning to tell the difference between something that is genuinely stable and something you are preserving only because changing it would make you uncomfortable, uncertain, or afraid of having to begin again. Around August 26 and 27, 26 cents. Let that distinction become part of the story you are listening to within yourself, not as a prediction that everything must suddenly change during those 2 days, but as an invitation to notice where your inner world may already be asking for a different kind of honesty. You may feel a quiet exhaustion around something you once defended without question, or notice that what used to feel safe now carries a weight you can no longer ignore. You may simply recognize that a choice you keep making is based more on history than on what you genuinely want today, and that recognition alone can create a small but meaningful opening. And that recognition can be surprisingly powerful. It does not need to arrive as anger, rebellion, or some dramatic break from the past, because your turning point may be quieter than anything other people would recognize as a major change. For Taurus, it can happen in the stillness of an ordinary moment, when you finally hear yourself say something you have been circling around for a long time. I can honor what I built without remaining trapped inside it. There is strength in that sentence because it allows the past to keep its meaning without giving it permanent authority over your future. That is a different kind of strength. It does not reject your patience or your loyalty, and it does not ask you to become someone who constantly chases novelty just to prove that you are evolving. Instead, it allows you to keep the wisdom of your nature while releasing the fear that says every change is a threat to your security. You begin to understand that a strong foundation is not one that never moves, never cracks, or never needs to be rebuilt. It is one that can support you when you decide to make a thoughtful change, reinforce what matters, and build again from a deeper understanding of yourself. And perhaps this is the part that matters most. The delay was not necessarily proof that you had been forgotten, and the things that did not happen when you wanted them to were not automatically signs that you had chosen wrongly. Some experiences were teaching you what you could sustain and what you could no longer tolerate, while others were quietly refining your sense of what kind of stability would actually nourish you rather than simply keep you in place. Sometimes you need to live inside an old definition of safety long enough to discover which parts of it truly belong to you and which parts were inherited from fear, habit, or the expectations surrounding you. Think of roots beneath rich soil. They do not announce their growth, and they do not move in perfectly straight lines. They travel quietly, sometimes changing direction completely, searching for water, space, and nourishment, while the surface appears almost unchanged. A root may encounter stone and move around it rather than forcing its way through, and that small act of adaptation does not make it weaker. It allows the living thing above it to continue growing. In the same way, what you have been learning through patience may eventually change what you are able to recognize, receive, and choose, even when nobody else can see how much has shifted beneath the surface. So when something meaningful begins to return to your life, do not assume it must look exactly like what once left. You may be meeting the same desire through a different door, in a form that matches the person you have become, with circumstances that ask less of your self-abandonment and more of your discernment. And when that happens, you may discover that the greatest change was never simply getting something back. It was becoming someone who can finally recognize its value without abandoning your own in the process. Someone who can welcome what is truly meant to grow with you, while still knowing when the soil beneath an old choice has become too small for the life you are ready to cultivate. Imagine a seed resting beneath the soil, unseen for so long that someone standing above it might assume nothing is happening. The surface can remain still through day after day, giving no obvious indication that anything is changing underneath, and yet the seed is quietly gathering what it needs, sending delicate roots into the darkness, building the structure that will eventually allow it to rise. Taurus, there may be seasons in your life that felt just as quiet, periods when you wondered whether your patience was leading anywhere at all, whether all the effort you had invested was simply disappearing into silence. But beneath that silence, something may have been developing that could not yet be measured from the surface, something connected to your strength, your standards, and your understanding of what you truly want to grow. That is why a delay does not always mean denial. Sometimes it is the space required for your foundation to become strong enough to hold what you are asking life to bring. Because receiving something before you are ready for it can be just as complicated as never receiving it at all. Think about the things you invested yourself in, the work you stayed committed to, the relationships you tried to nurture, and the plans you continued carrying even when the results were slower than you hoped. You may have looked at those experiences and seen mostly what did not come back to you. The recognition that never arrived, the opportunity that seemed to pass, or the outcome that refused to match the effort you gave. Yet beneath that disappointment, those experiences were also teaching you about your standards, your endurance, your limits, and what actually deserves your energy. But there is an important difference between waiting for something to happen and becoming conscious of what the waiting is revealing. Taurus can be patient enough to remain in one place for a very long time, especially when that place represents something familiar, dependable, or deeply valued. That quality can be a remarkable strength, because it allows you to build slowly while others give up too quickly. Yet patience becomes more powerful when it is paired with discernment, when you are no longer simply holding your position because you have already invested so much, but asking whether the ground beneath you is still capable of supporting the life you want to grow. Sometimes the question is not, how much longer can I endure this? But, is this still worth cultivating? Because when something finally opens, it may not arrive in the form you imagined. It could be an opportunity that looks unfamiliar at first, a new direction that asks you to loosen your grip on an old plan, a relationship that feels different from the patterns you once accepted, or a possibility that appears only after you stop insisting that fulfillment has to come through the same door you have been watching. Sometimes you can become so focused on the shape of what you expected that you fail to recognize the value of what is actually standing in front of you. If you are waiting for life to reproduce the past exactly as you pictured it, you may overlook a new possibility simply because it does not resemble the thing you once wanted. This is why understanding your own pattern changes the experience of waiting. Instead of treating every quiet period as evidence that you have fallen behind, you begin to recognize that some of the most important growth happens where nobody can applaud it. Roots do not need an audience, and they do not measure their progress by how quickly someone above the soil can see them. They simply continue searching through the earth, finding nourishment, adjusting their direction, strengthening their hold, and creating the unseen structure capable of supporting what will eventually rise. In the same way, you may have been developing qualities that were invisible to everyone around you but deeply important to the person you are becoming. And the more you understand that, the less you feel compelled to force everything into place. You do not need to chase what is not ready, convince someone to recognize your value, or keep proving that you deserve more simply because someone failed to see it before. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing what you have cultivated within yourself, even when the outer evidence has not caught up yet. You begin to trust that your worth does not rise and fall according to how quickly circumstances respond to you. A strong root does not need to announce itself. It keeps growing because it understands that depth matters long before anything reaches the surface. For you, Taurus, this can become an entirely different relationship with patience. You are not being asked to sit still and wait for life to repay you, and you are not being asked to abandon the qualities that make you steady, loyal, and dependable. You are being invited to understand when patience is helping something grow, and when it is simply keeping you attached to something because change feels uncertain. Those two experiences can look almost identical from the outside, because in both cases you may appear to be staying put, but inside they feel very different. One carries a sense of purposeful cultivation. The other carries the quiet tension of knowing that something may have outgrown the place where it began. There comes a point when you realize that the life you are building needs your participation, not just your endurance. You can respect what you have created while still making room for something new. And you can acknowledge the effort behind your past choices without allowing that effort to control every choice you make now. You can keep the lessons without keeping every circumstance that taught them to you. You can appreciate the ground that once supported you and still recognize that another piece of earth may be better suited to where you are growing now. That is not betrayal of your past. It is an honest response to your present. This does not mean becoming restless or throwing away everything familiar. That would miss the deeper lesson entirely. Your ability to cultivate, preserve, commit, and remain present through difficulty is part of your strength, Taurus. The transformation happens when those qualities are guided by conscious choice rather than fear of losing what you already know. There is a difference between giving something your time because it continues to matter and giving it your time because you're afraid to admit that its season in your life may have changed. Sometimes what looks like loyalty from the outside can quietly become resistance to a truth you already sense within yourself. And perhaps this is what makes the idea of something returning more meaningful. What comes back may not be the exact thing you once lost, and it may not arrive wearing the same face or carrying the same circumstances. Sometimes what returns is your confidence after a period of doubting yourself. Sometimes it is your ability to choose differently after years of repeating what felt safe. Sometimes it is an opportunity that finally makes sense because you have developed enough clarity to recognize why it matters rather than accepting it simply because it is familiar. The return, then, is not necessarily about getting the past back. It is about recognizing value from a wiser place. You are not the same person who first experienced the disappointment. You have lived through uncertainty, carried the weight of unanswered questions, learned what your energy can sustain, and discovered where your loyalty needs boundaries. You have also learned that not everything deserves unlimited access to your patience simply because you once believed in it. So when something valuable enters your life again, you are meeting it from a different place. You are no longer simply asking, will this stay? You are also asking, does this belong here, and does it support the person I am becoming? That question changes everything. It means your sense of worth is no longer dependent on whether the past returns exactly as you remember it. You begin to understand that some things were valuable because of what they taught you, while others may still have a place in your future because they continue to grow alongside you. You become less interested in recovering what was lost simply for the sake of proving that it was meant to be yours. Instead, you begin looking at what is in front of you with clearer eyes, asking whether it is nourishing, reciprocal, sustainable, and aligned with the life you are actually building now. The wisdom is in knowing the difference, and that wisdom cannot be rushed. Maybe the quietest strength in your Taurus nature is your ability to keep cultivating even when the surface gives you very little evidence that anything is changing. You know how to tend something slowly, how to give it time, how to notice small signs that others might overlook, and how to understand that growth cannot always be measured from one day to the next. But now that same patience can become more conscious, allowing you to release what has become restrictive while protecting what is genuinely alive. We do not have to uproot everything simply because one part of the garden needs to change. Sometimes growth comes from making room, clearing what has exhausted the soil, and giving the living parts more space to breathe. And if something in these words feels strangely familiar, let that recognition stay with you for a moment. Sometimes the first sign of change is not an external event at all, but the instant you finally find language for something you have been carrying quietly, perhaps something you could feel long before you knew how to explain it. That awareness can become the first opening in the soil, the place where a new understanding begins to push upward. You may not be able to see the whole shape of what is growing yet, but you can begin to sense that beneath the stillness, something has been taking root. And that deeper movement may continue revealing itself as you become more willing to listen.